On the morning of Thursday the 21st of February 1935, Hillman Airways' flight from London to Paris was being prepared for departure from Abridge Airport in Essex. 6 passengers were booked on the service. 2 had already arrived on Hillman Airways' own coach service from central London. The remaining 4 passengers would be arriving at the airport by motorcar. The pilot, John Curtin, recognised the 2 passengers who'd arrived on the coach. They were Jane Dubois, aged 20, and her older sister Elizabeth, aged 23. They'd flown over with Captain Curtin from Le Bourget a few days before. Both American citizens, they'd been staying at the Ritz Hotel in London, although they lived in Naples, where their father, Kurt Dubois, was Consul General to the United States Embassy. At departure time, there was still no sign of the remaining 4 passengers. The Dubois sisters had bought all 6 tickets, and the absent 4 were friends who were meant to be joining them on a trip to Paris. One of the sisters went into the terminal and telephoned her friends to find out they wouldn't be travelling after all. The flight departed Abridge shortly after 10 o'clock, with Captain Curtin and the Dubois sisters on board. As the aircraft climbed southeast towards the English Channel, in-flight conditions were described as bumpy, with a reasonable amount of broken cloud. The ladies asked Captain Curtin to close the sliding door behind the cockpit to prevent drafts in the cabin. It wasn't until some time later, as the aircraft coasted out over Kent, that Curtin decided to slide open the door and check on his passengers. To his utter horror, Curtin saw the cabin was empty and the passenger door was ajar, only being held nearly closed by the slipstream. The Dragon was equipped with wireless. Curtin transmitted a distress message to Croydon and then returned alone to Abridge. By the time Curtin landed, the tragedy was beginning to unfold. Several builders working on a new development just south of Upminster had observed something fall from the aircraft as it passed overhead. The cabin of the Dragon was sealed pending further investigation, and the evening papers carried the story as far as was known. Detectives examined the cabin of the Dragon. In it they found 2 pairs of ladies' gloves, 2 handbags, a suitcase, a half-drunk bottle of whiskey, a lady's shoe, and 2 sealed letters addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Kurt Dubois. Within the letters, all was revealed. In January 1935, 4 short Singapore aircraft left the United Kingdom on a delivery flight to the Far East. By late January, the flight had only proceeded as far as Naples when engine trouble and a bout of influenza prevented further progress. The 2 pilots of boat K3595 had met and become very friendly with the Dubois sisters during this extended layover. They were Flying Officer John Charles Forbes and Flight Lieutenant Henry Longfield Beatty, half-brother of the First Sea Lord, Admiral David Beatty. On the 15th of February, the Dubois sisters left Naples for London by train. Later the same day, boat K3595 crashed into a cloud-covered mountain on the island of Sicily. All 9 crew were killed. The sisters only learned of the crash on arrival in London. Jane Dubois, the younger sister, was infatuated with Forbes, and she decided a life without Forbes was not worth living. The girls were close, but it must have taken quite some persuasion to make Elizabeth jump too. An inquest was convened on Monday the 25th of February. Amongst the many witnesses called were Kurt Dubois and Captain John Curtin. It was established beyond all doubt that the telephone call made from the terminal at Abridge before departure was a sham. None of the 4 travelling companions existed. The Romford coroner, Mr. Lewis, having read out the 2 sealed letters from the Dubois sisters to their parents, asked the jury to return a verdict. The outcome was inevitable. Later that same day, the 2 girls were cremated at Golders Green. Their parents returned to Naples with their ashes. One has to feel some sympathy towards Kathleen Blakely. Due to marry Forbes in September 1935, she had to deal with her fiancé's death, his possible treachery, and the infatuated demise of the Dubois sisters. John Curtin left Hillman Airways shortly after the inquest, but he'd actually resigned a month before. An experienced pilot and first-class navigator, his notice period had been marred by misfortune. In late January, whilst flying Hillman's northbound service from Paris to London, Curtin had encountered severe turbulence over the Somme. Two stout wooden boxes, each containing 3 bars of gold, smashed their way through the side and the floor of the Dragon. The loss and damage were not discovered until the aircraft had landed, and there was a very real fear that all 6 bars of gold had fallen in the English Channel. However, a French farmer discovered the 2 smashed boxes in his fields, and with many zout alors, sacre bleus, and several large merdes, the gendarmerie recovered the gold. Curtin, who had previous seaplane experience, having flown Fairey F-3s with 47 Squadron, joined Imperial Airways on the flying boat route to Australia. Later transferred to the British Overseas Airways Corporation, he stayed on the boats throughout the Second World War, and in 1943 was awarded the King's Commendation for valuable services in the air. He died in 1986. The Dragon involved in the Dubois incident, like so many aeroplanes in the late 1930s, was sold to Spain and disappeared. If you have any knowledge of Hillman Airways and the Dubois incident, you might well have been looking at the maps and decided I'd used the wrong one. You are indeed quite correct. Hillman Airways started operating from Romford and then moved to Abridge Loughton Aerodrome, as seen here. However, by 1935 they were operating from another Abridge aerodrome. This airfield is still open today, better known as Stapleford Torney. This photograph shows a Hillman Airways Dragon outside the newly constructed terminal at Abridge, Stapleford. I might have used this map. The amendments in red are fine, although curiously Stapleford Torney is named Stapleford Abbots. However, further amendments in blue looked like they were done by an irate toddler, so I chose the wrong map. Thank you for watching.